What if Batman v Superman were good? Like, really good? Let's imagine for a second that I'm an executive at Warner Brothers and I decided to do a few rewrites on the BVS script, like Belated Media did for the Star Wars prequels, or Max Landis did for The Death of Superman, or Geeky Glasses TV with the Star Wars prequels. Just my personal take on what I think would make for a better Batman v Superman movie, taking the broad elements from the movie we already have and shaping it into something hopefully better. Is this me trying to prove that I could tell a better story than a professionally paid writer could? Sure, if that's how you want to see it. Really, I just want another way to vent my disappointment at what we could have gotten. Now, I know based on the amount of dislikes from my previous video that there are quite a few people out there who liked Batman v Superman, and if you find my version inferior, then please kindly voice in the comments what you would have done to improve. As it stands, while this is a second draft of sorts, the vast majority of what I'm about to tell you came right off the top of my head in a fit of spitballing, so let's see how it goes over. But hey, even the worst retreatment has to be better than what Chris Stuckman gave us. Bazinga! So, let's start with the first of many obvious changes. We cut out the Batman origin sequence completely. We don't need it. The way it's presented in the film honestly kind of makes Thomas Wayne look like a complete idiot anyway, so out it goes. Instead, what we get in its place is the origin story of Lex Luthor. Lex Jr., to be precise. We open the movie in Metropolis maybe a decade or a decade and a half before the meat of the story. Lex Luthor Sr. basically owns Metropolis already, and we're introduced to him staring bitterly at a painting of gods and devils in his office. On his desk is a newspaper from the Daily Planet commenting on how his business is tanking and he looks like any moment he could flip out. In comes little Lex Jr., and it's already clear that he's apprehensive around his dad. They talk a little bit, and through some natural dialogue that I wasn't smart enough to come up with, we realize that they're both Christians. Lex Jr. suggests that maybe he and his dad could spend some time together and take his mind off business. Lex Sr. loses it at being reminded of his own failure and smacks his son square in the face before leaving the room. We hang on Lex Jr., whose face shifts from sadness and dejection to anger, and he raises his eyes to the painting of God. From his expression alone, we know he blames God for everything. Cut to 2013, where we see Bruce Wayne as he witnesses the destruction of Metropolis. This scene is the only thing that plays identically to how it does in the movie, the only difference being that his employee Wallace loses an arm instead of his legs. Outside of that, everything plays the same, with the same 9/11 imagery, Bruce saving the same newly orphaned girl and staring up into the sky with pure disgust. Jump forward to the present, 2 years later, and juxtapose the destruction of Metropolis with Superman now being the hero everyone thinks he is. He saves people, he stops crime without any destruction or death, he smiles and jokes and waves while he does it. He's the big blue Boy Scout, and it's shown that he went out of his way to help rebuild Metropolis. Lois does a report about how the city's back to normal, maybe even better than it was, thanks to his help. We then follow Lois from the Daily Planet to her shared apartment with Clark, and we get a feel for their relationship as they just sort of talk for a bit. It becomes clear in this scene that although he radiates confidence in his Superman persona, Clark Kent himself is still feeling a bit unsure about what his place in the world is. He knows he wants to help people, and it validates him that he seems to be doing a good job, but at the same time there's some odd feeling that he can't shake off that he's not doing everything he could. Cut to Bruce in the Batcave watching reports on Superman in disgust just before he goes out on a mission. He doesn't kill people, but he does still brutalize and brand people far more than is necessary. Even then, he, Alfred, and even the police of Gotham City think he's firmly in the right. Either way, he harbors a lot of ill will towards Superman, but it hasn't quite reached a boiling point where he's itching to fight the guy. After all, Bruce is a practical, intelligent guy, and since the destruction of Metropolis, it doesn't seem like Superman has caused anyone any harm. Someone has reached that aforementioned boiling point, though, and it's Bruce's friendly acquaintance, Lex. Since his father's death, Lex has inherited the company, and he's done a pretty decent job of modernizing it. It's made clear in this version that LEXCORP has to deal with technologies, and while Lex Sr. was very, very business-focused, Lex Jr. is more of a schmoozer who's prone to throwing parties and getting on people's good side. At one of those parties, we get a similar speech to the one he gives in the film proper, albeit more coherent, where he says that knowledge is power, but some people prove that wrong, don't they? Some people have all the power, but none of my knowledge. The party guests are confused, but there's enough venom in his voice so that Bruce, Clark, and the audience know who he's talking about. Speaking of Clark, this version actually has a reason given for why he's even at the party. In the 2 years since Man of Steel, Clark has actually become the planet's top reporter, and he gets sent to handle coverage of the party. Bruce is still just there on personal invitation, and when he and Clark bump into each other, the discussion they have in the movie proper goes relatively unchanged. Batman may not kill people, but he handles the law too lightly for Clark's taste, and Bruce says that Superman, for as much as he's done, hasn't yet proven himself trustworthy. Lex butts in again, but this time, rather than the conversation just stopping there because he showed up, Clark and Bruce keep going, getting more and more passionate about their points before Lex himself joins in the conversation, essentially taking Bruce's argument to the extreme. Superman isn't just questionable, he's a clear threat and he needs to be taken out. And for Lex, this doesn't even entirely have to do with the destruction of Metropolis. What's worse for Lex is how Superman is basically teaching humanity to depend on him rather than their own will and intelligence to fix their problems. Clark seems about ready to raise a counterpoint, but he gets distracted by a disaster playing on the news, and makes an excuse to leave the room. Bruce and Lex are left alone, and Lex has visibly noticed that something is up with this Clark Kent guy, though he doesn't say anything about it right away. Lex takes time out to talk to Bruce alone, and he's like, "Bruce, you agree with me, right? This is a man's world, not Superman's, and the power should go to the best and brightest of humanity, and that's people like you and me. People like us should be running this whole score." And of course, Lex can put his money where his mouth is because he practically owns Metropolis already. There's an earlier scene where Lois mentions to Clark at one point that not a day goes by when one of them isn't writing a story about Lex Luthor. And Bruce can't really argue with him because he himself practically owns Gotham, both through Wayne Industries and his actions as Batman. So on principle, he just sort of agrees with everything Lex is saying, and Lex takes that time to inform Bruce that he's found this mineral that could potentially be the nuclear deterrent they need to keep Superman in check. He calls it kryptonite, and he wants the help of Wayne Industries to weaponize it. Bruce sees Superman saving people on TV and hesitantly says that he'll think about it. Lex goes off, and a moment later Bruce runs into a mysterious party guest named Diana Prince. Diana makes a case in Superman's favor, saying that she can hypothetically understand what it'd be like to be someone immensely powerful living among mortals. She says she believes that Superman's intentions are pure and that the destruction of Metropolis really was an honest mistake. Bruce says, yeah, well, that honest mistake killed dozens and dozens of people, and Diana is like, I doubt he intended any of that, and besides, how many lives has he saved since then? Bruce considers this, and as he turns back to the TV to see Superman saving people, we transition into a montage of more saving people, where we intercut Superman's heroics with scenes of Batman doing his thing. We also get more indirect friction between Bruce and Clark, as we see Bruce reading a story that Clark published in the Daily Planet condemning Batman's actions, and saying that vigilante justice against criminals who are mostly impoverished and desperate because of Gotham's own squalor is only making things worse for the city. As the montage winds down, we cut back to Clark and Lois's apartment in the middle of the night. Clark and Lois are in bed, but while Lois is sound asleep, he clearly hasn't slept even a little bit since he got there. Lois shifts a little bit, and without really waking up, she asks if Clark is going to spend the whole night awake again. Clark doesn't answer, and when Lois goes back to sleep, he gets out of bed, puts the costume on, and stands outside in the night air, listening for any trouble that he could possibly help with throughout the city. Wouldn't you know it, straining hard, he picks up on the voice of Lex Luthor, talking about, of all things, General Zod. Cut to LEXCORP, and Lex has somehow managed to acquire Zod's body. How he did it doesn't warrant much more than a single line, because what matters is that Superman appears right in the room in a flash. Lex is like, whoa, and Superman is just looking at him, deadly serious, like, Lex? And Lex is just like, Superman, hello, to what do I owe the pleasure? But already he's sort of slowly backing away out of fear. Superman says, what are you doing with Zod? 'Cause this already looks hella suspicious, right? And Lex Luthor's just like, I don't see why I should tell you anything. You're intruding in my building. Zod is a member of my species, but beyond that, for all his faults, he was a man. You can't just take his corpse and run experiments on it, Luthor, especially since I doubt there was any way you got it legally. And Lex is just flabbergasted for a second, and he's like, this coming from the literal illegal alien? And Superman's like, I'm taking the body, Luthor. And Lex is like, why? You weren't doing anything with him, and you're the one who killed him. And Superman just doesn't even have anything to say to that. And Lex keeps going, like, You know, when my father died, I surpassed his legacy pretty easy. I saved this company, in fact, and I can surpass just about anyone I please, including you, Superman. So don't make an enemy out of me." Superman still doesn't say anything. He just walks up to the body, and as he strides closer, Lex starts backing up even faster. Because for all his tough talk, of course he's afraid of Superman. This guy could crush him like a grape. And Superman hoists up Zod's body, and right before he leaves, he gives Luthor this smile like, "Did you really think I was gonna do anything?" And he leaves, and Lex is just there equal parts scared and angry, and his face is an awful lot like it was when he was a little kid. Superman has Zod's body, but he realizes he doesn't actually have anywhere to put it, and even though Zod was a monster, Clark can't help but feel a bit of natural kinship with him as the last sons of Krypton. And so, after some thought, Clark flies far out of Metropolis and Gotham, and he flies out to the mountains. And there he decides to make a sort of funeral pyre for Zod, and we get a quiet scene of him just watching Zod's body burn, and without any dialogue, just from his face, we get a sense that, wow, it's just hitting him now how alone he is in the world. He'd always felt like an outsider before he learned about his origins in Man of Steel, and now he feels just as left out, if not more so, because he is the only one. Cut to the next morning, and we see Clark back in the apartment with Lois, and Lois asks Clark if he got a good night's rest. Clark just smiles and says, "Of course," and then on the TV comes a live interview with Bruce Wayne, responding to the article that Clark Kent wrote about him. In the interview, Bruce says he's not willing to come down for or against Superman, but no one from the Man of Steel's precious pet city of Metropolis should be complaining about Batman's attempt to make Gotham a better place, when it's far, far worse off than Metropolis ever was. Hearing this, Clark realizes that, perhaps out of guilt for its destruction, he really has been giving Metropolis and its citizens preferential treatment when there's a city that needs his help more right across the bay. That night, criminals are on the run in Gotham as per usual, and when they see a shadowy caped figure standing over them, they unload on him with bullets. But surprise, it's not Batman, but Superman, who takes out the nearest criminals with ease in a way that doesn't leave them too injured. A small distance away, yet more criminals actually do run into Batman, and he takes out a few of them before Superman shows up and sternly tells Batman that he's got this. Bruce refuses to step down, and when the criminals use their argument as a chance to run, the two heroes put the fight aside for a moment and take on the criminals together. Truthfully, Batman does more of the actual fighting, while Superman is safely trapping them with his powers. Superman could easily deal with these guys all on his own, but there's a sense that Batman is getting way too into the brutalizing, and every couple of seconds, Superman has to take time out of his own efforts to redirect Batman's hits so that they're not so harsh. Like, Batman might be about to do something really brutal, and Superman does something roundabout to stop him, and Batman turns to him and is like, "Dude!" And Superman is like, dude? But beyond that, the two of them have a surprisingly good rhythm going. Once the criminals are done and apprehended, Batman tells Superman he's been taking care of this city his way for 2 decades now, and Superman can't just come in and call the shots out of nowhere. Superman basically says, yeah, he can do that, and it's here where it occurs to the audience that maybe hearing so many people call him a god or treat him like humanity's savior might have gone to Clark's head, and he's treating Bruce almost worse than he treats Lex. He says Gotham doesn't need Batman anymore, and it's got him, so Bruce can hang up the cowl. Bruce? Batman asks how he knows that, and Clark reveals he peeked under Bruce's cowl the moment he arrived. As Superman leaves with yet another warning, Bruce suddenly feels very powerless and very threatened. He has a talk with Alfred later that night about how maybe Luthor was right, and this man, this alien, who appeared from out of the blue 2 years ago just wrestled all of Bruce's control away with no one to stop him. He knows there's going to be a Senate hearing about Superman later that week, and he knows Lex is attending, so he decides to join him and make a case against Supes. The day of the hearing, however, Bruce gets a call from Lex saying there's been a development with the kryptonite that's far more important than the Senate, and Bruce has to get to LEXCORP now. Bruce goes, and as he and Lex keep tabs on the Senate through the news, we cut to the meeting itself, and this scene goes on far longer than it did in the original film, because, let's be real guys, if there was ever a single scene that could have salvaged Superman's character in this film, it was the Senate scene. Had the whole building not prematurely exploded before the conversation could even really get started, we may have actually given Clark the opportunity to express his own stance on things. We could have had him give his own input on the way everyone sees him as a god figure, his perspective on his own actions, and that's exactly what happens in this version of the story. "Guys," he says, "I know some people like to think of me as a god, but that's just not what I am. I grew up in small-town Kansas with Christian parents. I know I'm not the God. But I also know that if there is a God, he does things for a reason, and that includes putting me here on Earth. I like to think that reason is to help people, and that's all I've wanted to do since the incident 2 years ago. It's all I've wanted to do since I was a kid." And then Senator Holly Hunter considers that, and she says this: "You grew up on Earth?" And Clark nods. "In America?" And Clark nods again, and then we cut back to LEXCORP, and Lex Luthor's paying attention as Clark answers these questions about himself, and we see him mentally file that information away for later. We cut back to the hearing, and the senator continues. "Well, Superman, that makes you an American citizen, and under the jurisdiction of the American government. Now, I believe that you should be entitled to certain inalienable rights, but it's also true that you are a special case, and no American citizen with your powers can be allowed to just run carte blanche without some limitations." And this is where Superman starts to push back just a little bit. He's not indignant or anything, but he sort of blows it off really? Is that entirely necessary? Because all I do is help people. Ever since the incident, I go out of my way to not hurt anyone. And you can see on his face just this look of I don't really warrant that, right? I'm the good guy, yeah? And just a little bit of that haughtiness that he displayed with Bruce is back, and Bruce recognizes this. "If you limit me," Superman says, "if you even limit me to operating in America, that just means there's less people I'll be able to help." And he and the Senate go back and forth on this point until Clark is just "Listen, I destroyed Metropolis. Yes, that happened, and yes, it's my fault, and that keeps me up awake every night. I owe it to Metropolis to make up for that. I owe it to the world to help all the people that I can. It's the only way I can live with myself, and I can't let you limit me." And then the building explodes. We see the explosion from Lex and Bruce's perspective on the television at LEXCORP, and we see Superman fly away from the scene moments later. And Lex looks surprisingly, unsurprised, but Bruce doesn't pick up on that because he's just in too much shock. His fears have been confirmed. He and Lex were right all along, and for the safety of everyone, Batman has to stop Superman. Because from Bruce's perspective, Superman, no matter how confident he is in his own goodness, just blew away a whole group of people because he thought they'd get in his way. Not too long later, Lex comes to Bruce saying that there's something he's been keeping from Bruce and that he can't keep it any longer thanks to the Senate exploding. He's known that Bruce is Batman for a long time. Even more than that, however, after the hearing he's done some digging and he's confirmed that Clark Kent is Superman. Bruce takes this all in, and his resolve to stop Superman only strengthens. Lex looks at him, however, and says he can't hold any punches this time. He and Bruce both know that Superman is too big of a threat. Bruce can't just stop him, he has to kill him. Some threats, Lex says, demand the permanent solution. Cut to Clark flying over Metropolis, clearly troubled and on his way to speak with Lois. Suddenly, though, a kick to the face sends Clark flying miles and miles away, landing somewhere largely uninhabited where the thing that kicks him floats down to meet him, turning out to be a woman in armor. The woman lunges at Clark and beats him around for a bit before Clark asks who she is and what she wants. She introduces herself as Wonder Woman and gets on Clark's case about the Senate blowing up. Clark reveals he had nothing to do with it and that there was a bomb in the building that he spotted just a second too late with his X-ray vision. Diana wrangles Clark with her lasso of truth, and Clark is like, "What the heck is this?" And Diana's like, "Say that again." So Clark repeats himself, and when he checks out, Wonder Woman is like, instantly calm down. And Clark, who's just now letting it catch up to him how strong she is, hesitates for a second before he turns to her and is like, "Are you Kryptonian?" And she says no, and she just says she's someone who's been in Superman's shoes. And she talks about how hard it must have been to have the world turn on him for something that wasn't his fault, but that he shouldn't be too desperate to make up for it because his need to take damage control to the extreme is what turned some people against him in the first place. A hero, she says, doesn't help because they feel they owe it to someone. They help because it's just the right thing to do, and Superman considered this as Wonder Woman leaves him be. He thought he understood that before, but now he's not so sure. Back in Gotham at that very moment, Bruce is pissed, and as a result is even harder on criminals than he ever has been. Lex's words about the permanent solution are echoing in his head, and he just knows everyone in that Senate building was a person who would still be alive had he been able to stop Superman earlier. He's about to strike one criminal with a potentially killing blow, only to stop when he realizes it's his old employee, Wallace. Batman is so stunned that Wallace is able to get away, and back at the Batcave, he looks up Wallace only to see that he wasn't able to get another job after losing his arm and had to turn to crime for money. Bruce is seriously starting to question everything about himself before he gets another call from Lex. There's a whole army of kryptonite weapons ready to go right now. Bruce arrives at LEXCORP and gears up while Lex wishes him good luck on taking down Clark, and says he'll be listening in on the fight through an earpiece in the armor. Bruce heads out and Lex leaves the armory room to check up on what he calls Plan B. Clark, meanwhile, is still struggling himself, and as he flies over Gotham with his supervision, he spots Batman geared up like he's about to go to bloody war. He swoops down and asks Batman what the gear is for. "I thought I told you were done." Bruce refuses to back down again and says that the getup is for you, Clark, before firing a kryptonite grenade at him. Clark is weakened, but he's decided he's headed up to here with this guy. Batman and Superman square off, both desperate to prove that they're the hero they've always seen themselves as by taking out the other. Superman takes Batman, flies him to an abandoned church, and the two duke it out, berating each other's actions and methods as they fight. And Bruce really goes in on Clark's worldview where he's like, if you aren't malicious, then you must be downright naive. To think that you can operate in this world with all your power and have people trust you? You must really think this is some kind of sunshine and daisies fairy tale. Well, the world isn't like that, and the world isn't like Smallville, Kansas. I don't care who Clark Kent is. Anyone with Superman's power is dangerous, and if you don't understand that, you gotta go. As the fight goes on, Bruce only gets more and more vicious, while Clark almost seems like he's conceding. Even with the kryptonite arsenal, he could likely beat Bruce easy, but part of him is coming to realize that maybe Bruce is right. Maybe he's not the hero he thought he was. Maybe he's just one step away from being the tyrant Zod was. Maybe the world really would be better off without Superman. He outright says as much when Batman has him pinned and pulls out a kryptonite rifle on him, the only time he holds a gun in the whole movie. Clark relays what Wonder Woman told him. A hero doesn't help because they feel they owe it, they do it because it's the right thing to do. If Bruce thinks taking Clark out is the right thing to do, he should go ahead. Bruce hears these words and hesitates, and hesitates, and hesitates. And he looks down at the kryptonite rifle in his hands, and he just has this epiphany of like, what am I turning into right now? I'm smarter than this. Finally, he lets out a yell and throws away his kryptonite arsenal. Lex asks what on earth Bruce thinks he's doing, and Bruce admits he doesn't know what it means to be a hero any more than Clark does. Hesitantly, the two talk for a moment, and Bruce is like, I got so worried about what could happen if someone as powerful as you were ever pushed to the edge. And I got so obsessed that I didn't realize I was there myself. I'm sorry. And Clark is like, I guess we both deserve the benefit of the doubt. And he says, I think there's a hero in both of us, and there's a place for both of us. Bruce says that he may be willing to trust Clark enough to let him live if he at the very least leaves Gotham under Bruce's care. Superman agrees and says that maybe he and Batman can work out a check and balance system in each other. Of course, Lex ain't having it. He calls Bruce and he's like, not a smart move, Bruce. And he unleashes Plan B, a giant behemoth of a bioweapon named Doomsday. 1 part living monster, 1 part kryptonite. The creature isn't composed of enough kryptonite to kill Superman just by being near him, but Clark is slowly weakened the more and more they fight, and Doomsday hits harder than anything Clark's ever felt. But the thing is, Batman and Superman have to go to Metropolis to intercept Doomsday, because LEXCORP is in Metropolis, and once Lex unleashes Doomsday, he just starts taking things apart and destroying everything and until Superman is in his field of vision, it's like he doesn't even care. Bruce and Clark, even working together, are likely to get slaughtered. Bruce tells Lex to call the creature off before he destroys the city, and Lex says he's never programmed a way to call it off, and thought that it would only attack Superman. When Bruce says Doomsday isn't just attacking Clark, but everything in his path, Lex hesitates before saying, it's a necessary sacrifice. And of course at that point Bruce is just like, I cannot believe I helped you with this, you've gone too far. And he decides he and Clark might as well go out fighting. And as they make their last stand against the beast, the two solidify their respect for each other. Thankfully they don't die on account of Wonder Woman showing up. Bruce recognizes her as Diana and calls her as such just as Superman calls her Wonder Woman. You know her? They ask each other in a variation on the I thought she was with you line. Realizing that Diana is about as strong as Clark without the weakness to kryptonite, Bruce tells Clark to let he and Diana handle actually fighting Doomsday. Being near the monster slowly makes Clark weaker, and he'd be of more use making sure civilians and property are safe. Clark says he can't just leave the other two. We got this, Bruce says. Go be a hero. And so they go and do it. The fight ends with Doomsday taken out, not a single casualty, and it's not because the entire city was miraculously uninhabited due to work hours, okay? It's because Superman saved them, and our three heroes standing triumphant. Now, originally I was going to give this story the option for two endings, one where Clark died and one where he survived. Thinking about it though, I've decided I really just would never consider killing Clark at this point. So in this story, Clark lives, and Bruce turns and looks at him as the two of them and Diana are all just like coming down from the fight. And this, by the way, is where I would like to subtly highlight a difference between the Avengers and what will later become the Justice League. Because at the end of Avengers, the Avengers beat the Chitauri and they're all just like tired and exhausted. They're just hanging out at a shawarma joint looking spent. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, though, the three of them aren't even close to spent. They are standing triumphant, confident, clean. They are on top of the world, and the people of Metropolis come out, and they are just like applauding these three. And so Bruce turns to Clark, and he says, I was wrong about you, Superman. You're not malicious, and you're not naive. You're just a good man. And Clark is like, thank you, Bruce. Diana, thank you. The people of Metropolis owe their lives just as much to you as they do to me. But if you don't mind, there's someone who I need to have a chat with. Smash cut to Superman busting right into LEXCORP, right next to Lex himself, and Lex is just like, Jesus Christ! He's scrambling around, looking for something to defend himself with, and Superman is like, Lex Luthor. Almost like it hurts him to say that name or it tastes bad on his tongue. And he's like, you intentionally unleashed that monster on Metropolis. Had Batman, Wonder Woman, and I not been there to stop it, we don't know when it would have stopped. It could have taken out the city, it could have taken out Gotham, it could have destroyed the whole world. And Lex starts in like, you don't know that, you can't prove that, but Superman cuts him off like, I have to hand you over to the police. And at this point, both he and Lex are just stone-faced, and Lex is like, I only ever created that thing to destroy you. I was trying to save this world from you, and if it meant that you had been destroyed, losing a city would have been worth it. And Superman is just looking at Lex like he's the scum of the earth, like everything wrong with humanity is just standing in front of him in this person. You know, Superman says, I destroyed Metropolis once. to stop someone who was going to destroy the planet, all life on Earth. That fight took hundreds of lives, and I decided to take Zod's life too. And even in that moment, as I was doing it, I knew it wasn't worth it. And if you don't understand that, if you are seriously telling me that you would do this again, then there's something wrong with you. I have to live with that, and now you have to live with this. Superman takes Lex Luthor to prison. And as he leaves him there, in his cell, with no one else around, the guards are off, not paying attention just for like a minute, Lex is like, I know who you are, Clark. Think about what I could do with that information when I get out of here. And Superman is just still for a moment, and without even looking at Lex, he just flies away. Cut to nighttime, and it's some undetermined amount of time later, but you get the sense that it's been a little while. Superman is standing next to the bat signal. He's been standing next to it for a while, and he hears a little cough, and he turns around, and there's Batman. And he's like, "Did you call Diana?" And Bruce nods, and of course Diana comes floating down a moment later. And together the three of them talk for a bit, and together they decide that there will always be dangers like Luthor or Doomsday out there. People who think they know what's right, but really are just abusing power. They decide they have to form a league together. A group of extraordinary people, like them, dedicated to upholding justice, right for right's sake. Now, Diana's been around for a while, and she says she knows some of these extraordinary people. Not only that, but she knows where to find them. Cut to credits. So, there you have it. Flawless? Hardly. Heavy-handed? Almost definitely, but an improvement, hopefully. There's a good movie in BVS, and I know that to some of you it's already right there up on the screen. If you think the movie is good or better than my version, then go ahead, voice your opinions in the comments, but at the same time you should consider that as legitimate as the merits that you find in the movie are the problems that people find in it, and I think that these are problems that, like any movie, should be faced head-on rather than ignored and glossed over. Let's try to do a first for the history of YouTube and try to keep the comments civil, okay? Civil.